Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School Pregame Show live. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC, and it is time to preview another Knicks matchup, a back-to-back, this time on Monday night against the Washington Wizards. The Wizards come in at 2-10 on the season, two very fun wins early in the season against the Atlanta Hawks. And we will talk about what's been going on in Washington during this rebuilding year that they made very clear in training camp would be a rebuilding year. Some fun young players on the team, obviously a stacked draft that they're looking forward to. But the Knicks come off of two back-to-back wins themselves over little brother across the borough over in Brooklyn. I think I speak on behalf of everybody that this weekend ended up being pretty fun. Minutes totals aside, but it's always good to win the Battle of the Boroughs here in New York, and the Knicks now play one more home game on this 4-game homestand. To think they were a Kobe White haircut away from potentially being 5-0 over the last 5 games, or with a chance to go to 5-0 over the next 5 games, because I don't want to look past this Wizards game. I know they come in at 2-10, and some stats on them on the season. They're 29th in offense, 30 in defense, 30 in net rating. They are second in pace, though, and we did see a Bulls team come in here that's 4th in pace on the season, run up and down the court on the Knicks and run them ragged in the first half, which meant the Knicks got off to a slow start. So all that to say, I come into this game cautiously optimistic, but I also recognize that this team has played a lot of minutes, specifically the starting 5 has played a lot of minutes. Karl-Anthony Towns fell in the third quarter and for some reason wasn't taken out of the game immediately, but that's just what this team does. And who knows what his status will be on the second night of a back-to-back. Obviously, I have some questions about the Washington Wizards. I need to go get an expert on the Washington Wizards in order to talk about it. So joining me now to talk about this matchup against the Washington Wizards, the host of the Wizards podcast, love a straightforward name of a podcast, as well as one of the writers for Bullets Forever, Greg Finberg. Welcome to the Knicks Film School Podcast, sir.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for the nice introduction. As a watcher of Knicks Film School, even though I'm not a Knicks fan, I have a lot of Knicks fans being from New Jersey. I have a lot of Knicks fans friends, so I'm always a regular here. It's cool to be on the show instead of just listening to the show, and I'm excited to dive into it. You know, this might not be your marquee matchup that you're used to on the show, but I think it'll still be, an entertaining game. So, I'm excited to be with you and break it down today.
I would absolutely go as far as to say that this isn't a marquee matchup. I agree with you there. And look, I'm trying to be as respectful as possible because the 2-10 is, of course, what you expect from the Wizards through 12 games. A lot of people predicted them to be toward the top of the lottery standings at the end of the year. Obviously, the GM came out before the season and said, look, we're not going to be very good this year. And he was very open and very honest with the expectations that he set. But I mean, this is a generational draft, if you believe all the experts, whether it be pick a Rutgers guy or obviously Cooper Flagg at the top of the draft. So 2-10 might actually not be the worst thing based on expectations that were set and the talent that you've seen on the floor so far this year. Like, what's the temperature? What's the vibe in Washington amongst the fan base right now?
Yeah, so essentially they're 2-10, and you had 2 early wins against the Hawks. And I don't know what the Hawks are doing. They're rebuilding, but they're not really rebuilding. And I had a bunch of Wizards fans contacting me and saying, what are we doing? We're supposed to be losing. We're a little too good. I was just like, chill. No, we're not. You got to give it some time. You beat the Hawks. The first 2 games, they played really competitive against Cleveland. Fell apart in the second half. Obviously, the Cavs are 15-0. In game 1, they were really competitive until the second half against Boston. They're 11-3, and they were very competitive 1-2 games against Atlanta. So you had a really decent start. But these last 8 games, this 8-game losing streak, their margin of victory, their average margin of defeat is 17.5 points. None of these games have been competitive. The closest game was a 12-point loss at home to Golden State, and that was just because they put the bench guys in and they kind of came back towards the end. So this team isn't the team that was 2-2 in the beginning of the season. They're the team that's on an 8-game losing streak that's nearly losing by 20 points every night. And that's kind of the gist of it. And while you're rebuilding, you still want to remain competitive. Obviously, most Wizards fans want to lose games. They want Cooper Flagg. They want Ace Bailey. They want to have the best shot at the number 1 pick. but you want to be competitive in these losses. If you're just going out there and running cardio and not playing defense like they have been, you're 30th in defensive rebounding percentage, you're towards the bottom in 3-point percentage as a team. They're not playing good basketball. And while you want to lose, you want to be building good habits in those losses, especially when you have such a young team. And I haven't seen that over the last 8 games. And now going against the Knicks, one of the best defensive teams in the league, it's going to be tough, especially with the individual defenders. And the Knicks have struggled. They struggled kind of in the beginning. They're figuring it out, but you see towards the last couple of games, like they're growing as a team. Their defensive chemistry, the rotations, everything's kind of coming together. And for the Wizards, it's kind of imploding and falling apart. So that's why this is kind of a funny matchup, because they're going in completely different directions right now.
So I'll start here, and this is, I know the Knicks have had the reputation over the years of a good defensive team. Hartenstein leaving, combined with just trading for Cat, who's not going to be the anchor of a strong, the back end of a defense, I should say. Cat's actually played really well defensively this past week. It really started in the Philly game, where you saw him battle it out with Embiid and Drummond. And I mean, his defensive rebounding has had an impact on the defensive end. But it's really been this past week. And I don't know if bullying on behalf of Knicks fans was like what got Mikal Bridges to start playing defense, or just playing his old team. But there were moments this weekend where we saw the reason why the Knicks traded every single pick known to man, except the Wizards pick. They still have the Wizards pick, although it's lottery protected. I'll say this: the Knicks defense is not as impenetrable as it has been in years past, which is, I think, is part of why I am I'm not concerned. I don't want to, and I think I may speak on behalf of Knicks fans. Just that they're playing a ton of minutes. Like Josh Hart and Mikal Bridges both played 45 and 46 minutes last night. OG Anunoby had a light night. He only had to play 40 for the Knicks in the Sunday night game. So Tibbs gave him a rest. But I think the worry is coming out flat against a team that's 2-10 on an 8-game losing streak, and then that team taking it to him, like whether it be Koulibaly, like a young player that I'm excited about, or Jordan Poole, who, I mean, this is where I'm going with my question, like might have the tendency to go off at times. And looking at his splits, 22-2-5 on 45, 91 splits. That's not terrible. So, I mean, just if a Knicks fan is worried about this game, what would you say to them?
I would say it's warranted. I remember when the Wizards were really good in like 16-17, and you'd have teams come into Capital One Arena against John and Brad, and you'd be like, this is an easy win. And you kind of just play down to your competition. And you see that all across the league. And it's different being on the opposite side, being on the Wizards side, because there's been a lot of games, even last year in the first year of the rebuild, where like they went into Phoenix and they were up by like 21 in the second quarter. And you kind of knew, even as a Wizards fan, like the Suns are going to come back. It's inevitable. It's just, can the Wizards finish the job? And they did the same thing a couple of times last year with the Knicks. They were competitive early on, and then the Knicks were like, okay, let's figure it out. And they kind of flipped that switch. What I could see, and what I think you're foreseeing, is the Knicks coming off a couple of wins, kind of stringing things together. They see an inferior opponent and they play down to their competition. It's just inherently harder to get juiced up for a game against the Celtics versus a game against the Wizards. And that's kind of what you see when teams play down to their competition. And so, look, I could foresee, the Wizards coming out of the gate strong and the Knicks having to claw their way back. You saw it against Chicago the other night, where the Knicks fought back the entire game. Obviously didn't, work out in the end, but still, you saw that they can play down to their competition. What I would say to you is the Wizards the last couple of games have started miserably, with the exception of the Hawks game where they were up 10 at the end of the first quarter. They've just come out flat, and it's been a theme all season where they come out flat. So if the Wizards can kind of play the way they did against Atlanta and make their threes and play defense, I could see a big first quarter. But even if that happens, like if I'm a Knicks fan, you're going to come back. You're going to win this game. I really wouldn't be too concerned.
So the Knicks opened, I guess I should say this game opened with the Knicks as 13.5-point favorites. That line has gone up to 14.5. Not a gambling expert here, but I kind of like that Wizards cover, just based on the fact that the Knicks are, I mean, I have no idea if Deuce McBride is playing. I really don't know if Karl Anthony Towns is playing in this game, and just like the minutes load that the Knicks have been on. This feels like a very like comfortable 12-point win if the Knicks are going to go about it. And I could be completely wrong, and the Knicks won by 30 tonight, but I'm cautiously going forward, especially with what has been asked of them over the last couple of days. Which, look, this is what I've been. It sounds like I'm being overly critical of Tibbs. This is what he's spoken to. Like, the way he deals with injuries is he asks more of the guys he trusts. This is just what he does, and I mean, they're 7-6 so far, so hopefully it leads to a little bit more winning. As far as how they're playing, like the style of play that they're playing, you talked about them building good habits. One of our commenters watching live actually asks about rookie Alex Sarr and how high are you guys on Sarr? What is his NBA comp? If I can ask that, as well as the question, like, how do they play? Like, do they play drop coverage? Do they switch it all? I mean, the pace is what's staring out to me, that they play fast, but I also notice they don't get a ton of threes up. So if you could speak to like what we can expect to see on the court tonight.
Yeah, I'll answer that one first. They do play a lot of drop. In terms of their pick and roll defense, a lot of people have talked about how poor their transition defense is, their perimeter defense. I mean, last night, they allowed their opponent to shoot 52% from three in the first half. They ended up shooting 45% from three. So those are two areas of concern. But the pick and roll defense has been non-existent. And I don't know if that's just a combination of a really young center in Sarr not understanding when to drop or, when to play certain coverages, when to communicate. You got to remember, they have three rookies pretty much playing 30-plus minutes a game. They have a bunch of younger guys with some veterans. And so they're still figuring out the defense and the communication. But in terms of that, you're going to see a lot of drop coverage. You're going to see a lot of, in the pick and roll. If Brunson and Cat run a pick and roll the entire game, I think they'd probably score or get fouled on about 80 to 90%. It's just because, like, you'll get Brunson to the elbow and the Wizards are going to drop, so he can pretty much hit that floater. If he takes it to the paint, Sarr's got to commit, so he has Cat on the roll. He has a skip pass to the corner because we always cheat too much, and that's why we're so bad on the perimeter, is because we crash in when they run the pick and roll, and then shooters are wide open. And that's kind of our defense, and that's why we've been struggling so much. So in terms of that, like, Cat should have a bunch of those, like, 10 to 15-foot jumpers, a couple push shots. Like, Cat and Brunson should dominate. If that's the pick and roll that you guys run the most, I think that's kind of how it's going to work out. In terms of Sarr, my comp has always been Jaren Jackson Jr. I've gotten a lot of flack for that because he's elite and he's kind of what that slender, 7-foot build that likes to shoot threes. That's kind of the ceiling for him. The issue is Sarr can't shoot right now. He's shown an ability to. He went 3 of 4 from three against Atlanta, but he's still shooting 20% from three on the year. And that's on a high volume of threes as well. So it's a good sample size. But the defense is there. He's averaging 2.5 blocks per game. He had 2+ blocks in all 10 of his first games in the NBA. Like, the defense is there. The rim protection is there. What I will say is individually, defending centers has been an area of concern. And that's, due to a lack of experience. It's due to, obviously a lack of size. So if you got Cat one-on-one in the post against Sarr, I think Cat will eat. But if you have someone running to the rim and Sarr's protecting, I think Sarr's probably going to win that matchup. But offensively, he's still very limited. The shot isn't there. He doesn't have much of an offensive game in terms of creation. What he can do is kind of, get in the paint and rebound. He's shown an ability to kind of be a menace on the offensive glass. And that's something that I've seen throughout the last couple of games. But in terms of, respecting his three ball or respecting him in the pick and roll, I don't think you guys have to do that.
So you mentioned the other two rookies that the Wizards are playing three rookies at the moment, between Sarr and Bub Carrington. And then Keyshawn George is the last one, right? Now, Keyshawn George was starting for them when Kuzma was out. And look, this is, I feel bad talking about the numbers in this way, but the lineup data, they were at -15, that starting five. And Knicks fans, that sounds bad, right? That starting five, when you go to clean the glass, was at around a -15 and about 140 possessions, not a significant sample size. Then Kuzma came back, and the new starting five is at a -34 in about 170 possessions. This is, as you spoke to, this is a team in rebuilding that has some rookies that they're trying to get more playing time for. Now, the way you get more playing time for them is you trade off some of your veterans. And Busy has another good question. What's the return you want on Kuzma? And I think it's a two-part question. Like, what's the return you want for Kuzma? What's the return you want for Valanciunas, who's currently the backup center for the Wizards? Malcolm Brogdon, if he plays, what's the return you want for him? So if you could speak to it, like the most optimistic deadline that the Wizards could potentially have, what does that look like?
Well, first, anything beats last year's deadline. They traded Daniel Gafford technically for Keyshawn George and Rashawn Holmes, which is a great trade. Obviously, it worked out for both teams, but they didn't trade Tyus Jones when they could have, and he walked for free. They didn't trade Landry Shamet. Now on the Knicks, is he on the G League team right now? And then
so he dislocated his shoulder in the preseason,
yeah.
And they through some Brock Aller cap finagling, they gave him a roster spot so they can monitor his progress. Mm-hmm. So he's on the 15 and technically in the G League, but not necessarily like obviously not playing at the moment. So yeah, he's on the roster.
So they didn't trade him or Tyus Jones when, most fans thought they should have. Same with Kyle Kuzma. Even at last year's deadline, they had a deal in place to send him to Dallas, and Kyle Kuzma essentially vetoed that trade, which I get. Like, as an organization, you want to run it by people, but at the same time, it kind of seems like now they've moved off of the do you want to get traded, and it's more like we're probably going to trade you, and it just inherently makes sense. You have a really young roster. And you got this 28-year-old forward who could really help as a third or fourth option on a contending team as a 3 and D player. And I say the defense part hesitantly because on the Lakers, he was okay, but on the Wizards, he's been miserable. So I feel like on a better team, that defense can come to fruition. But Kyle Kuzma is inherently a piece that contending teams want. He's still under 30, but he doesn't make sense for the Wizards, especially when he's taking 28 shots a game against Atlanta. Only making 11 of them, and most of them are contested deep threes. And it's just, if you look at Wizards Twitter for 1 second, it's trade Kuzma, trade Kuzma, trade Kuzma. And I haven't been on the trade Kuzma bandwagon. Like, you got to get him, out of here. But for the last 2 years, I've been on you need to explore those avenues. You need to be looking at trades because he's not going to be here for the long haul. He's not the solution. He's definitely not your number 1 or number 2 option. And at this point, I'm at get anything you can. I think the Wizards can definitely get a 1. They've been asking for multiple, which I think is ridiculous. I wouldn't trade a 2 first for Kyle Kuzma ever. Even if he's playing at peak level, I wouldn't do that. But I would move a first round, even if it's protected. I would move a first rounder, and the Wizards have space so they can take on salary filler to entice another team to do that. So I think in terms of Kuz, you're going to see 1 first round pick. For Valanciunas and Brogdon, it gets a little more dicey just because of the age of both. And also they know the Wizards need to trade them. With Kuzma, they know the Wizards can hang on to them, but Valanciunas definitely isn't a long-term answer, and neither is Brogdon. Brogdon is on an expiring deal, so they need to move him. It's the same thing as Tyus Jones last year. The Wizards were like, for Tyus Jones, give me a first-round pick, and the teams were like, no, you need to sign him in the offseason or he's going to walk. You're going to let me dictate this move, and that's kind of where it gets tricky with the expiring deals. So you're in a similar situation with Brogdon, and factor in he didn't play the first month of the season. He only returned last night. So he's got to build that trade value back up. In terms of Valanciunas, he's been great. He's, a double-double pretty much, most nights when he gets enough playing time. Defense is non-existent. Let me be completely transparent. If you want a defender, like if the Knicks need, a backup center that can defend, don't look at the Wizards because he can't defend anything. But what he can do is he can rebound for you. He has a decent shot, and he can help you offensively. And I think it seemed like the Lakers make sense. And I've been saying this all along because they wanted to sign him in free agency, but he decided for some reason to sign with the Wizards. Not really monetarily. He's only making $9 million a year, but the Lakers need a backup big. They're always looking for help with AD, who's usually hurt. So I think Valanciunas to the Lakers, a first round pick is tough, but again, I think the Lakers could cough it up. But if you can get multiple seconds for him, anything you can honestly get for him or Brogdon, because not only are you trading them to, get assets back, but you're opening playing time for others. You're opening playing time for Bub and George and Sar. And I think that's the thing that I'm looking at most versus the return on guys like that.
So you answered pretty much every question I had. So even ones I didn't ask. So thank you so much for that. I think the direction I was going to go with the Kuzma of it all. And look, I don't even know what the Knicks move would be for Kuzma because it was a 4 for $90 that he signed the extension that he signed, or or maybe it was even a re-signing. But the fact that he's in year 2 of this deal, so you are just kind of doubling down on this roster if you're adding another guy that's under contract for this year and then 2 more years. And I guess it's something along the lines of Mitchell Robinson, because I believe he's making he's making 23 this year, 21 next year. So it's just descending contract. It's a good deal. The only thing I would think of is that like the fact that the Knicks have the Wizards pick is that more valuable to them in the long run, that they could get control over their entire draft going forward. I just don't know if that's the asset the Knicks want to use on a backup wing, because that's what they would look at Kuzma as a 3/4 that could play next to Cat, play next to whomever in this like world of Anunoby, Bridges, and Hart all playing the 2 through 4,
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the pick because I've seen all throughout the offseason, you got everyone on Fanspo, they're making mock trades and all that stuff. And I saw a lot of Knicks fans putting that into packages like it was, a regular first round pick. It's not necessarily too enticing for me personally because I think the Wizards are going to be the worst team in the league this year. And I think they're also going to be the worst team next year. And I believe it conveys to 2 second-round picks
after next year.
Yeah. So I think that's just inherently the result because what is it? Top 10 protected, then top 8 protected.
So I kept getting, I can look it up. I keep getting confused between that and the Detroit pick that they traded out, which lo and behold may convey this year. So the fact that I know the protections go down. I'll look it up real quick, but to your point, it does convert into 2 seconds at a certain point.
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it's a top 10 protected this season, which I think obviously won't convey, and then a top 8 protection the next season. And if that doesn't convey, then I think it's a 2026 second and a 2027 second. And if that is the case, you're looking at, from a Wizards perspective, you're going to bottom out this year. And once you probably trade Kuzma, Valanciunas, and Brogdon, it's possible you're even worse the following year. So I don't think they need to take that pick back because I think they're more than comfortable paying 2 second-round picks. Especially, they got 5 second-round picks from Phoenix in the Bradley Beal trade. They have like 13 second-round picks over the next 4 to 5 years. And if you're an NBA fan, second-round picks don't necessarily equate to much unless you're really good drafting and you take a Deuce McBride or you take a Jalen Brunson and you have like those guys and you're really good at that, then you can use second-round picks to your advantage. But for most teams, they're trade chips, they're pieces to move contracts and salaries. And so I think from the Wizards' perspective, they're fine giving the Knicks a 26 and 27 pick. Now, if the Knicks were to do, a Detroit pick, maybe that's enticing, considering it might convey. I think what they want to do is.
So the Detroit pick went out in the Karl-Anthony Towns trade.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Of the protected picks that they had this going into this offseason, the Milwaukee one, which also looks like it's going to convey at a very good number, depending on what happens with Milwaukee. That's in Brooklyn. And then the Detroit pick, which is top 13 protected this year, and then goes down to top 11 and then top 9 and then becomes 2 seconds. But again, right now it would be the 16th pick in the draft. That's in Minnesota at the moment. And to the question earlier, it's top 10 this year, top 8 next year. The protections the Knicks have on the Wizards pick this year.
Yeah, good to know. So I think basically what I was trying to say is the Wizards want to get picks now. Last year, their whole thing was we have our picks and we have 3 first-round picks. I mean, they traded their second-round pick to move up because they wanted Keyshawn George. Didn't pick in the second round. What I think they want to do is get as many picks this year. I mean, this is a loaded draft class. Last year, it didn't really matter where the Wizards got in the lottery because I think they would have taken Sarr at 1. They got him at 2. And you didn't really know where the chips would fall. There wasn't that marquee prospect. I mean, they're saying like Reece Shea, who went 1 last year, might not even go top 7 or 8 in this class. So for the Wizards, I think they want as many, chips to throw as possible. They want as many chances as possible. And this draft class is where they get it done. So if a contending team wants Valanciunas, wants Brogdon, wants Kuzma, and they're willing to give picks this year, I think the Wizards are going to be way more inclined to do that because they like these prospects that much more.
Yeah, the Knicks ran into that issue last year that like they were trying to trade for Bruce Brown at the deadline last season. And the Raptors obviously had already just made a trade with the Knicks where they took no picks back. And then they made a trade with Indiana where they got 2 picks in last year's draft. back. So they already had 3 picks, and the Knicks were like, we'll give you a protected first round pick this year. And they're like, no, we want a protected first round pick next year in that draft. So look, you make the right point, I believe, to any Knicks fan that is putting that pick in the any Kuzma sweepstakes potentially. Look, the Knicks they have a 2029 swap. I think that would be the better asset. But the Wizards, that pick's going to convey for them this year anyway. The Wizards, they're going to have a top 10 pick anyway. So them trading a pick taking away all the protections is not beneficial to the Wizards. They probably want extra picks in this upcoming draft if they're going to trade some of their best assets. Look, the Knicks are, obviously made some pretty significant moves this offseason, and they're at different ends of the spectrum as far as like what assets you're bringing in, what assets going out. The Knicks are looking to guys that can contribute now rather than for the future. I also don't necessarily see a trade partner. The Knicks don't necessarily need a backup point guard in Brogdon, or if you're looking for a backup center, just wait for Mitch Robinson to come back healthy at this point. But I want to get your thoughts on what the Knicks did this offseason. The 2 big trades that they made. What was your reaction to the relook, to the reworking of the roster that they made?
I love them, and I love them for one reason, and that's from a place of pain, because as a Wizards fan in 2016-17, we never made that move. We were always too scared to go all in. And it's a little different. Like, Washington is inherently not a place people want to go to most times over New York. But at the same time, like, the Wizards had John Wall, they had Bradley Beal, they had Otto Porter, Markieff Morris, Marcin Gortat. Like, that's a pretty solid starting 5. But they didn't get the last piece to the puzzle. They didn't have enough to propel them over the Celtics, even over the Cavs, and definitely not over the Warriors. And you kind of wasted those years, because while they were decent and making the second round, they never had enough. You never really made a move for Paul George when John Wall wanted to get him. You didn't make a move for KD when he became available. You didn't go for it. And that was what Wizards fans were so upset about, because the worst spot to be is in the middle, when you're not the worst and you're not anywhere near the best, and you're just kind of treading water. But for the Knicks, made the second round last year, probably would have made the conference final if they were healthy, but didn't. Lost game 7, and they kind of had to reload. And they could have just run it back and said injuries are the problem, but there were more problems lingering, and they addressed them. They got Bridges, they got Cat, and those are bold moves. You traded Randall and DiVincenzo, who, when that whole team was together for a very limited time, but when your starting 5 was healthy, you were unbelievable. And you were like, no, we want to improve. We want to get Cat, we want to get Bridges, and we kind of want to go for it. And I always respect that. Even if it doesn't work out for a team like the Knicks, like, you're trying, and your window is still big. Like, Cat, Bridges, Brunson, Anunoby, they're all young. It's not like you went out and got up, some old veterans that are kind of clinging on to life. You got a bunch of younger guys that are kind of in their prime, and I think that they're going to mesh really well. And it's going to obviously take time. They're building it, and you've seen that over the course of the first couple games. But I'll always respect the team that goes for it, and the Knicks are going for it. So I really like what they did.
Old veterans clinging on to life. But enough about the Philadelphia 76ers. I agree with you in the fact that when you can go all in, you respect the all in move. I think there's been, I know there's been an adjustment period for a lot of Knicks fans. Mm-hmm. The fact that last year was this scrappy underdog team that just won with the power of friendship. And it's taken some time to fall for this team that at times can't stop a nosebleed. But this last week, I got to say, Greg, you're catching the Knicks at this interesting inflection point where, like, Tuesday was this like very gritty win in Philadelphia with Embiid's first game back, and Cat like really showed a physicality that I think a lot of Knicks fans appreciated. And then the next night, like, Cat gets hurt, and they're getting blown out in their first back-to-back of the season by the Bulls. And then they make this comeback to take the lead. They're down 22 in the third quarter. They make this comeback to come back late in the fourth, take the lead. And then I mentioned it at the top of the show. Kobe White, Josh Hart fouls his hair on a 3. And apparently he also like made marginal contact with his back, but I think it's the hair poofing that was what caught the ref's attention, that gave and then Brunson has a game winner go in and out. like if that, then you get the 2 wins over the Nets where they actually do hold off this very gritty Brooklyn team, as much as I hate to admit it. And now they have this game against the Wizards. So I do believe they're starting to form an identity. It's just we fell for that team that last year, that earned a lot of our respect. So a couple of questions from our live chat before I let you get out of here. Ben Kim Gervey, what is the Wizards' definition of success for the next several seasons? When, how many years, is the strategic plan expected to be realized?
In terms of success, wins and losses are not the determinant for the next couple of years. It's kind of the behind the scenes work. How are the young guys developing? Are you seeing Alex Sarr mold into a rim protecting center that can space the floor like you hope he is? Are you seeing Bob Carrington mold into a 3-level scorer that can kind of take over the point guard duties if Jordan Poole isn't that guy for the future? Is Keyshawn George molding into that 3-and-D guy? Is Bilal Coulibaly moving up and making his threes? And is he, morphing into the all-around star player that you hope he is? That's kind of the success of the team. It's how are the draft picks doing? Are you getting draft compensation in return for the veterans that you want to move? It's these kind of smaller moves that you're not necessarily going to know how they're working out at the moment, but you'll be able to see it. So development, I would say, is the word I'd use to determine success. Definitely not wins and losses. What I would say for the second part of the question is it's going to take at least 3 to 4 years. And what kind of, I thought maybe in 26, 27, they could go for it. But what kind of hit me hard is when they traded Denny Avdia, who was only 22 years old. And they were like, no, you're too old for us. You're too far along into your career. We need a younger 18-year-old Bob Carrington to replace you. That kind of hit home. Like, this is going to take a while. They might not compete until 2027, 2028. And I'm talking about competing. Like, maybe they'll sneak into the playoffs in the next 3 years as a late seed. But in terms of being like an OKC where, you arrive and you're the first seed and you're going to contend, I think that's a ways away just because they haven't found the star player yet. I mean, a team like OKC, they traded for Shea, but, a team like Boston, they drafted Tatum, they drafted Brown. The Wizards, I don't think, have that guy yet. As much as I'd like Bilal Coulibaly to be that guy, he just doesn't strike me as that 30-plus points per game a night guy. So I think they're still searching for it. And, hopefully in the next couple of drafts they find it. But until they do, I think 27, 28 is kind of that target window for when they're going to compete.
Yeah, there's like a substitute you need for that guy, that main cog that leads you to eventually to some winning, like a Shea or a Tatum. You see it with some of these younger teams. And look, I'll just say it again. This Nets team has a lot of young players that play hard, a lot of complementary pieces. And then Cam Thomas is your main cog that, I mean, he gets buckets. I'll give him that. But like you look at a team like Houston that just has wings and contributors for days, but you hear the Kevin Durant rumors for a reason, that they're waiting to see if they can put a guy in the middle of all of this. Like Detroit, what they're doing, like hell, even the Knicks at this point, like they went through a couple years of the complementary pieces. Ironically, like barely any of them are here anymore. There's no RJ, no Quickly, no Grimes, etc. But you then end up with like a Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, an Anunoby, like the Deuce McBride, like those are complementary pieces. And then, a Jalen Brunson comes out of nowhere. And obviously Karl Anthony Towns, we know where he came from. So it's about eventually building the foundation first, which is Ben as a follow-up. How can you develop players properly in a system designed to ignore wins and losses? Does losing or accepting losing become habitual?
Great point, Ben. And this is what I've been stressing for a while is, yeah, they've lost 8 straight, but it's a matter of how they've lost those 8 straight. Like the first 2 games they lost to Boston and Cleveland, they lost by like 20 points. But if you watch those games, they were very competitive for the most part. The reason they lost was just a skill issue. There's a skill gap and an experience gap, and that's why they lost. The last 8 games, however, hasn't been that. It's been, sloppy turnovers, very bad defense, honestly, a lack of effort on defense, bad transition defense, pick and roll defense has been non-existent. They haven't made their shots. They haven't run the offense the way they were in the first 4 games, and they've just been really bad. And they're not building those winning habits. Even if you don't win, you can still build winning habits. And when you're on a team, and I always mention this, like the Houston Rockets before Ime Udoka, like they were just a bunch of young guys playing basketball with no care in the world for how to actually play, how to defend as a team, how to play offense. That's why their coach got fired, and they brought in a guy like Udoka that can bring them together and have them playing the right way. And now they're 10-4. But a team like the Wizards, if you got a coach that isn't coaching the right way and they're running around and building these bad habits and losing all these games, that's not good. And I always say this, it's not that you're losing, it's how you're losing. And they haven't been losing the right way the last 8 games. So it is a great question. And I completely agree. You need to be building good habits, even if you're losing 60 plus games a year.
So the Wizards coach, Keefe, he took over for Unseld last year as an interim and then was just named the head coach. Is he the tank commander? Is he the Brett Brown at the moment? Like, what's the coach of the future on the currently the head coach?
I don't know, honestly, and it's hard to say because like you have a lot of people that consider it to be a lazy hire, and they were very tight knit with the hiring process. Not a lot was reported, if anything, on anybody that they interviewed for the job. And I even said, like, it was Keefe's job to lose. It didn't really seem like they did much in terms of an extensive search. And they said it was extensive. And I don't know. I'm not there in the room. But it seems like it was Keefe's job. And they kind of interviewed to interview. They knew it was his. And I think he earned it. I mean, last year, they still were terrible when he took over, but they were better. And I think he's a player development guy. He's a player's coach. And I think the guys enjoy playing for him. They enjoy, how he goes about his business, but I don't see him sticking it out. I could very well see a Brett Brown situation where, he kind of gets them back, but they hire, a new coach to take them further. I'd love for it to happen. You see Mark Dagnall in OKC, they love playing for him. He's instilled winning principles. Their defense is elite. And that's the ideal situation where Brian Keefe takes the Wizards to and through the rebuilding process. But the early returns obviously have not been good. So I don't know yet.
So last couple questions before I let you get out of here, because the coaching thing is it's fascinating because I don't know what the correct process is there, because like you look at Kenny Atkinson, what he did with Brooklyn, and they built their culture up so much without any real draft capital that like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving wanted to go there, and then they fired him, and you look at what he's doing in Cleveland, and that was a team with Bickerstaff that turned things around, and then they fired him, and now look at Bickerstaff in Detroit, seems to be turning things around there. So I don't know. I agree with you in the sense that there's the habits and the how of it all may eventually just lead to them hiring someone when they get different talent on the roster. So a couple things before we go. J Rose 712 says, do you think Kolek and or Porty get minutes tonight? I think he's asking me as well. Mm-hmm. How do you think a Sarr versus Porty matchup pan out? I don't think Tyler Kolek gets minutes. If it's any indication of last night when Tibbs played 8 guys and Tyler Kolek wasn't one of them, I don't think he wants to play Kolek and Campaign on the floor together. And then Huck Porty, I think, gets minutes if Karl Anthony Towns doesn't play. I think he's been very clear that he trusts Jericho Sims as the veteran that has played 3 more years than Huck Porty. I actually don't think Sims has been atrocious as some have indicated. I think Huck Porty has shown more, but he was the last pick in the draft last year for a reason. There are still moments when you ask the film guys here at Knicks Film School where there's still some learning some habits that he has to get over. And then one more for me and then one more for you. So Kessler and Clarkson, that's their core. I like to live in reality, not in fiction. I believe this is asking a question about the Knicks trading for Kessler and Clarkson. I'd love a Kessler and Clarkson trade. So I would love for the Knicks to trade for Walker Kessler and I don't know if the Wizards have had any experience dealing with Danny Ainge, but it's just impossible to do so. So the Knicks discovered this in the summer of Donovan Mitchell, that they almost traded for him and then he went to Cleveland. That Danny Ainge said, I will only accept this. And the Knicks were like, what about this? He was like, I will only accept this.
Mhm.
And then he was like, the Knicks were like, well, what if we include RJ? And he was like, I will only accept this. And they're like, well, then we're going to extend RJ. So take our final offer. And he was like, I will only accept this. And then the Cavs offered this and he got it. So that's my answer to any Clarkson and Kessler trades. Last question for you. How often do you want to strangle Jordan Poole?
Honestly, this I get it, but like
he's been good this year. 45%
from
3 on 8 attempts. That's good.
This season, he's been great. He's shooting the ball really efficiently. He's getting to his spots. He's creating space. The one-on-one, you always knew he had, but the fact that he's been able to create for his teammates, not turn the ball over too much, and kind of morph into the starting point guard role, that's kind of been cool to see. Because you had a lot of fans after the first 25 games last year that were calling for him to be traded. Honestly, you legitimately had people commenting on my post, trade him for Ben Simmons so we can get the contract out. Like, that's how bad it was. And now you're seeing those same people singing his praises on the timeline. And all I was saying at the time was, look, I'm not going to go tell you that Jordan Poole is going to turn it around, but just wait. Like, he's in a new situation. He's getting played at shooting guard when he's a point guard. His head coach isn't putting him in the right spots. Just give him some time. And now he's, instead of playing him like he's Klay Thompson, which he's not, they're playing him as an on-ball point guard. And that's kind of where you've seen the growth. So honestly, that's probably been the biggest storyline apart from Bilal Coulibaly's development is how good Jordan Poole has been this year.
That's probably the one disservice I've done throughout this conversation is that we've really not talked about Bilal Coulibaly a ton. I mean, shooting 55% from the field this year, had the breakout game against the Hawks in one of the 2 wins that the Wizards have had this year. Man, I was high on him in the few flashes we saw last year, and then it seems to be realized in this season. So we'll see what happens. Greg, you've been great with your time today. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you have to run, so I'm gonna let you go. Before you go, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and all of your stuff.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Andrew. This show is awesome. It's always a good listen. You can find me is at Greg Finberg on Twitter. Just post a bunch of Wizards stuff on there. Like Andrew mentioned, it's the Wizards podcast on Apple, Spotify. Really bland name, but it's what you're going to get. You're going to get Wizards content. So, that's the best spot to find me. I usually post that about once or twice a week.
Bland isn't the word. Direct. You know what you're getting. Like you said,
Direct.
It's a direct name. There's no sugar coating. I think there's a pod. My Clippers go-to pod for these is the Clips and Dip podcast, which it's creative, but I sometimes I just need the Clippers podcast, although I can't lie. The Clips and Dips remains my favorite pod name that's out there. Greg, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you to everybody that's joined me for this edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dig the show, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video. Remember to subscribe, spread the word. Follow Knicks Film School on all socials. Yes, we have added Blue Sky. We're not leaving Twitter for those who think we are. We've added Blue Sky. We've added Threads. We're on all the socials, interacting with all of you, engaging with all of you. So please follow us all there. I will be back on Wednesday before the Suns game. That's a 10 p.m. start, so I have no idea when we're going to do a pregame pod, but at some point on Wednesday we will. Until next time, though, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight. We will do a playback watch-along as well for tonight's game, me, John, and Benji. So join us tonight, and I will speak with you soon. Peace.